Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for being here. And welcome to the Airline Pilots Association 61st Air Safety Forum. It is now my distinct pleasure to introduce the 10th President of the Airline Pilots Association International, Captain Tim Canoll, who will offer some remarks and introduce our first keynote speaker. Captain Canoll.
It's good to see everybody this morning, and thank you, Joe, and thank you all for being here today. Welcome again to the 61st Air Safety Forum. And before we continue, let us acknowledge those who have paved the way for our progress but are no longer with us. I particularly want to acknowledge our fellow ALPA colleagues at Germanwings and all of those adversely affected by the tragedy of Flight 9525 in March of this year. Please join me in a moment of silence for our fellow ALPA members and others in the industry who have flown west. Thank you. So, big couple of days in front of us. The theme of this year's Air Safety Forum is Keep America Flying, a flight plan for safe and fair skies. It's also the title of our newest policy paper, which we're releasing later today, that outlines critical issues in our industry is facing, and suggested actions that can resolve those issues. This paper, of course, follows closely May's release of State of Our Skies, Canada, which takes on the same task north of the border. As professional airline pilots in the United States and Canada, it is up to us to ensure that the airspace of North America is safe and secure. We are the last line of defense in many instances. We are professionals who work in and manage an intricate system, executing detailed processes and procedures that provide safeguards for everyone in the system. And we're also advocates pushing for one level of safety and security for all airline pilots. Whether we fly cargo, passengers, large aircraft, not so large aircraft, turbojet-powered aircraft, turboprop aircraft, we all need the same level of security and safety for all operations, pure and simple, period. The upcoming FAA reauthorization bill provides an opportunity to come one step closer to that goal, which has been a plank of this association for years and decades. House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee Chairman Bill Schuster promised that the bill will be transformative and include language that may change the way we do business, namely changing how air traffic services are provided, what organization provides those services, and how that organization is structured. In recent years, we've seen a renewed interest in reviewing the structure and governance of the organization that provides air traffic services in the United States. And there are several factors that led us to this conversation at this time, including the fact that there were 23 extensions to the last FAA reauthorization bill. That cannot happen again. Partisan wrangling in Congress and outside of the halls of Congress over non-germane issues that delayed the bill. Sequestration and its furloughs and temporary government shutdowns, including large reductions in air traffic services. These factors affected the efficiency, if not the safety, of the air traffic control system. So ALPA's dedicated considerable resources to the ATC system design discussion. We've studied the issue extensively, and we believe that a safe, efficient air traffic control system must have the following 6 characteristics. 1, it should be a not-for-profit entity. It should ensure all users pay a share that is fair and equitable based on their use of the system. It should take into account commercial aviation's benefit to the nation's economy. 2, it should have long-term stable funding. The funding must be predictable and sufficient for the sustained development and continuous modernization of an extremely complex system. 3, it should include all stakeholders. The structure should ensure involvement in decision-making by ALPA, representing the professional pilots, and by NACA, representing the air traffic controllers, and other key operators within the system. 4, it should be able to adapt. The ATC system must be agile enough to evolve with technology advancements in a timely manner. It should be robust enough to ensure that thorough, timely safety analysis of key programs and procedures are completed. 5, the ATC system should be well-staffed, and it must ensure a sufficient level to maintain safe operations in any airspace or airport used by air carriers or other aviation system users. And 6, it should provide a stable and secure working environment. Any shift in responsibility for providing ATC services from a government agency to another not-for-profit agency must not adversely disrupt or disturb the employer-employee relationship. Any shift must include the continuity of collective bargaining relationships and processes for the represented employees. So, if Congress decides to change the way we provide ATC services, it will be a complex process, likely as complex as the implementation of NextGen itself. And those two incredibly complex tasks will need to be thoroughly integrated and coordinated. If we're going to attempt this change, it will not be a trivial endeavor. And it will take the will of every aviation stakeholder to pull it off safely and successfully. But ATC reform is not the only issue that's important to us in the FAA reauthorization bill. And here's the rest of the FAA reauthorization bill top 10 list from ALPA's perspective. We want a long-term, stable funding for next-gen implementation. As a primary operator of the national airspace, along with our colleagues at NACA, we're leading the charge for upgrades to the system that are long overdue. We'd like any attempts to roll back the safety provisions of the previous bill, including the minimum first officer qualification and flight and duty time portions, must never gain ground. These are clearly safety issues, and we will continue to combat attempts to weaken these important regulations. We want safe integration of remotely piloted aircraft into the national airspace system, which includes the ability to see and avoid the aircraft. It's important that active collision avoidance, sense and avoid technology, and capabilities like TCAS and ADS-B be mandated on these aircraft. Otherwise, these aircraft are invisible to our members flying their aircraft and to the controllers that assist in providing separation. Pure and simply, if the remotely piloted aircraft operate in the airspace where our members fly, or if they could inadvertently stray into that airspace, then they must use the same rules and react in the same way we do in the cockpit. We want a mandate for secondary cockpit barriers. A couple of airlines have moved on with voluntary equipage, but others have not. And the cost-benefit analysis shows a 2-year return on investment for a secondary barrier. So for such an important issue, and I hate this term, but I'm going to use it, this is a no-brainer. We want regulations for lithium batteries as cargo on cargo aircraft. We've made great progress, but continue the fight to strengthen standards for carriage of hazardous material on our aircraft. We now have 2 documented accidents, and 1 suspected accident attributed to lithium batteries. So we're standing on firm ground. We need standards for packaging and limits on the number of batteries that can be contained in a package, in a container, or on an aircraft. Also in the area of cargo operations, we want science-based flight and rest regulations, science-based. While our airline industry is the safest in the world, the cargo airlines, unfortunately, have a significantly higher accident rate than passenger airlines. Fatigue and carriage of hazardous materials contribute to that high accident rate. On top of those items, we're advocating for continued funding for Pacific airports to ensure the availability as en route alternate landing sites. improved safety data protections, including the automatic acceptance of reports submitted to the Aviation Safety Action System, funding of the Human Innovation and Motivation Study, or HIMSS, program, and reinforcement of the importance of captain's authority. As I mentioned earlier, the theme of the Air Safety Forum this year focuses on safe and fair skies. To be clear, we're not talking about the blue skies and smooth air we all hope for on every flight. We're talking about a single level of safety and security, a level playing field with fair business practices that apply to all, and a thriving North American aviation industry, one that is vital to this world's economy. This year, ALPA joined the Partnership for Open and Fair Skies. The partnership is fighting against unfairly state-subsidized airline operations that threaten our industry's opportunity to thrive. Our careers depend on success in that arena just as much as our lives depend on keeping the level of safety and security the best in the world. And we thank our partners in the Partnership for Open and Fair Skies for standing with us. ALPA safety representatives and our full-time staff have been instrumental in educating members of Congress and their staff on why ALPA's safety and security issues are so important, not only to our members, but to the traveling and shipping public. We are involved, we are prepared, and we are dedicated. Because of that, we continue to be the voice of the airline pilots. Those of you in the audience that are airline pilots may think, yeah, I'm just doing my job. But your job is a key element in the economy of North America, and for that matter, the world. We've put together a short video on how airline pilots keep North America flying every day. Included is a by the numbers of ALPA's Air Safety Organization, the largest non-governmental aviation safety watchdog in the world. So those numbers and that scope of work is pretty impressive. I think you owe yourself a hand. And watching that reminds me, it never ceases to amaze me how much expertise we do have in ALPA. We're aviators, given. That's a given. We're pilots, we fly airplanes. But we also have ALPA pilots who are subject matter experts in meteorology, chemistry, law enforcement, intelligence, aerospace engineering, medicine, and that list can go on and on and on. Your dedication to the profession is unmatched, and the entire aviation system is better, safer, and more secure because of your efforts. That's not to say we're going at this alone. Far from it. ALPA's air safety organization encompasses a synergy of a cadre of airline pilots and dedicated professional staff working together towards a common goal, along with our partners from government, industry, and other pilot organizations. When it comes to safety and security issues, we nearly always agree on what's right. Nearly always. We have to capitalize on that agreement, that partnership, and continue working together to address the challenges our industry faces every day and into the future. By being here to learn our perspective and sharing your perspective, together we can ensure a safe, secure aviation system for the years to come. So what are we going to tackle while we're here? Our folks that plan the Air Safety Forum have put together another great agenda for us all. When you look at all the issues, you may think you've seen them before, and to a certain extent, you certainly would be right. We will be hearing some new developments, but things like next-gen, safe integration of remotely piloted aircraft, or cargo security and safety are not new issues. They're issues we've been working on for years. That's not to say we can't fix these things, and it's not because we've ignored the issues to go after some low-hanging fruit, though the easy stuff is, for the most part, done, to be honest. We are fortunate to be in a part of an industry that has an unbelievably good record of identifying and mitigating safety and security issues. Unbelievably good. And we're the envy of the industry, of the modern industrial world. And now we're down to the hard stuff, the truly hard stuff. It's time to tackle the complex issues, the issues that may take years or even decades to work through, and it's time to redouble our efforts. But that's the job we all signed up for. If you're sitting in this room today or listening on the webcast, chances are this is your life's passion. You're dedicated to making the airline profession the safest, most secure form of transportation the world has ever known. And ALPA will continue to looking for ways to make the systems safer and more secure. We've made progress in the carriage of lithium batteries, but there's more to do. We've made progress improving our working conditions, but there's more to do. We identified tiny holes in the safety and security net, but there's more to do. As an ALPA representative sitting in here today, you always know there's more to do. And if you're an industry stakeholder or an air traveler, rest assured that your airline pilot will not stop until we find anything and everything that stands between you and a completely uneventful flight. We continue to push for improvements in science-based flight and duty rests for cargo pilots, maintaining the highest training standards and methods, a modernized air traffic control system, the safe integration of remotely piloted aircraft, pilot-friendly RNAV procedures, better security screening, and that list goes on and on as well. It's that dedication and recognition of the need for continuous improvement that is the hallmark of ALPA's safety, security, and pilot assistance efforts. We will not stop. And now, before I get to stop this morning, there's one more thing I have to do. It gives me great pleasure to introduce this morning's keynote speaker, Congressman Peter DeFazio, the ranking member of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, which has jurisdiction over aviation, among other areas. He's served on the committee since he was first elected almost 30 years ago and has developed a reputation as an independent, passionate, and effective lawmaker. Throughout his time in Congress and on the committee, he has taken the lead on several multi-billion-dollar surface transportation and FAA reauthorization bills and has worked to strengthen Buy America. As a new ranking member, his focus will continue to be on the fight for infrastructure investment that results in job creation, increased safety, economic efficiency, and strategic growth. And of course, he'll help play a major hand in this year's FAA reauthorization bill, so I'm sure he was paying close attention to my earlier remarks. In a guest commentary in the May issue of the Airline Pilot magazine, Congressman DeFazio wrote, "Safety is always the most important issue when it comes to aviation." I think I can speak for the group here today and say that we fully agree. So please join me in welcoming Congressman Peter DeFazio to the Air Safety Forum.
Thanks. Good morning. Welcome. You are here at a very important time, although at this point FAA reauthorization is off till sometime in September, although Chairman Schuster and I had a conversation last week where we're going to share some language on the reauthorization. We've been working on subcomponents of it, but the major outstanding issue is the ATO, and we have slightly different views there. I'll go into that in a minute. We both have the same or very similar concerns, and they're shared by many who work in the industry or actually in the Air Traffic Organization, which is we've got to solve the problem of Congress. And that is stupid things like government shutdowns, indiscriminate across the board sequestration cuts. The Republicans this year in appropriations cut the acquisition budget, the capital budget of the FAA, despite the fact we are trying to implement Next Gen, because they had to meet their sequestration, which is stupid across the board cuts, targets. So the chairman and I both are concerned about the stability of funding, and that was also mentioned in the introductory remarks. We need adequate, stable funding. I would say at current levels we're not quite where we need to be, and it's certainly not stable. We actually are producing about 92% of the FAA budget now is produced from revenues generated by and in the industry. That's a major evolution. When I first started on the committee, more than 20% was coming out of the general fund. So we've got an 8% issue. The simplest fix, which isn't where we're looking to go because there's a barrier where we couldn't get there even if we wanted to do just something simple, would be to say, okay, so let's take the FAA as it is. Maybe we can find other ways to solve some of the other problems I'll get to in a minute. But let's find that 8%. Let's figure out where that revenue comes from. Then let's take it off budget, make it mandatory spending. The appropriators don't get to mess around with it anymore. They won't like that. And go forward with a very predictable budget into the future. Now, unfortunately, they have a rule that we can't raise revenues for any purpose, so therefore we can't figure out a way to get that additional 8%. And we're not going down that path. Besides, there are other issues of concern the chairman and I have. We are both concerned about, and the committee has been concerned over quite a number of years about procurement at the FAA. In fact, if you go back and watch hearings over the years, you'll find me frequently saying there's only one agency of government where it's a procurement, then the Pentagon, and that would be the FAA. So we've had long-standing concerns about procurement. Actually, back in the 90s, Congress tried to change that and said, hey, we think procurement's a problem. We're going to exempt the FAA from regular procurement requirements. This was actually in the early 00s. And they ended up, after they went through the process and after OMB got a hold of them, they ended up with essentially the same lame, difficult, labyrinthian procurement system. Then we had another issue. It said, they ought to be able to streamline the agency. A lot of people talk about the mid-management bulge at the FAA. Let's give them some new personnel rules, free them up a little bit from OPM so they can actually begin to deal with that, scale appropriately. We want people on the line. We want people out there doing, actual inspections of the aircraft. We want, an adequate number of air traffic controllers. Let's get rid of this mid-level bulge. Well, we gave them authority in another FAA bill to have different personnel rules. Well, after OMB and the administration got through them, they ended up essentially in the same box. So we think those are outstanding issues that need to be fixed: procurement and personnel. And so there's then the discussion becomes, how do you do that? As you heard in the opening remarks, I don't think anybody is supporting the British model, private for profit. So we're looking at two issues: a nonprofit corporate model and a nonprofit government entity that would be a freestanding entity. I wouldn't call it a government corporation because Chairman Schuster says his people just can't accept the word government, so I'm calling it a constitutionally chartered something or other. So here's the issue. The Constitution is very clear. And in fact, Germany had to amend their constitution. We aren't going to do that here. To do what they did with ATO, our Constitution, with very recent Supreme Court and D.C. Circuit Court rulings, has said since the 1930s you cannot delegate regulatory authority to a private entity, whether it's for profit or not for profit. Doesn't matter. Can't do it. So that's a very significant structural barrier. There are some others, but that's the biggest one. Now, again, I'm not going to reveal any confidences, and I haven't actually seen the language, but I believe, at first, Chairman Schuster and his staff didn't think that was an issue, and then after I got a 23-page brief from the Congressional Research Service, American Law Division, they said, oh, yeah, maybe it is real, and in fact, they hired a very expensive law firm, or A4A did, and they said, yeah, if you're not really careful, this is a really big problem. So they've come up with a workaround, but I believe, and again, not revealing any confidence, not having seen, that their workaround would again require going back to the Department of Transportation to get essentially approval of things done by the private corporation. And my response to that is, why? Why would we want to Rube Goldberg the thing just so we can call it a private not-for-profit when you could set up a new 21st century model of a government corporation? Now, people say, oh, the Postal Service. Yeah, you're right. They have a crappy governance structure of all political hacks. And it actually it is totally, it's very much mismanaged, but it's still making money except for a mandate Congress put on them to prepay health care for people who haven't been born yet who might someday go to work for the Postal Service. They have to prepay health care for 75 years. So they are limping along, making a little bit of money when you take away these stupid congressional mandates. But they could be much better governed and much better run. Congress has also hobbled them in terms of services they can offer, which are offered by many other postal services around the world. Nobody else is talking about doing away with their postal service, only here. So, so you could develop a 21st century, constitutionally chartered model for a corporation, which would not have the constitutional issue of being a private entity and being delegated regulatory authority. Then you would not have to go back over to the administration to get permission to do things that are regulatory in nature, including the raising of fees and revenues. So I'm working on that track. Bill's working on the other. We have common goals. We will see if we actually exchange language this week, and I'm convinced that, hopefully after he sees what I'm proposing, he'll find a way to convince, his colleagues to support this and not to have to go around the barn to fix a private, not-for-profit. Now, the airlines really want it to be private, and in their first version, they would have controlled the board. Now, that's not going to happen. We're not going to allow the airlines to control the board with a majority of votes. In his recently released outline, you can see that that's not happening even in the chairman's model. So, so maybe now that they don't get to control the board, they'll be more reasonable and open to listening to an alternative that could work, I think, much more elegantly and solve these real problems. So that's a debate to be had in the fall. Now, back to safety. Been very, very engaged in safety issues as a very frequent flyer ever since the beginning on the committee. I've flown now somewhere well over 5 million miles. I'm not even sure anymore how many. You know, I got engaged in safety issues very early on. My first effort was after the Manchester flight when they found people stacked up like cordwood dead inside a survivable crash because they couldn't get out the overwing exits. Within a very short period of time, the British Regulatory Authority mandated, you know, that they have a wider space to be able to actually access the overwing exits. It took 7 years here. I did that for 7 years. Fought for 7 years to get that. And then even after we got it, they produced a couple of studies saying, you know, actually spacing those seats further apart over the wing actually delays evacuation. And they tried to undo it after I got it done. So safety is an ongoing issue. There are always going to be pressure from people who are looking just at the profit side to say, no, wait a minute, you know, no, we don't need to do that. So I'll go through a few more. The issue of you know, fatigue and duty time. There are those who want to push back on those rules. You know, there are those who would like to expand those rules to cargo. At the moment, we've fought to a standstill. I would like to expand to cargo. There are other forces that would like to roll them back. You know, we're probably not going to make any changes there, but we should be able to at least defend the status quo. On the, you know, the minimum standards for first officers. I started working on this when a guy named Bolger was head of the Regional Airlines Association, and I think that was either the end of Reagan, because I was here for 2 years with Reagan, or the beginning of Bush. You know, was very concerned, and for years the example I would use is the first officer needed half the time to sit and fly the plane in training for a hairdresser in Oregon. I said, I really don't, that doesn't seem to quite work out for me very well. We had that fight for many, many, many years until the tragic Colgan Air crash. And that was so outrageous in terms of, I mean, you know, what's a stick shaker? What, oh, okay, I want to put the nose up. I want to, you know, very, very sad. You know, basically 2 kids not properly trained. Fatigued, especially in terms of the co-pilot, living in her parents' basement in Seattle and commuting to the East Coast because she was being paid a little bit over minimum wage for the job. You know, we finally got very meaningful changes, finally. Took a horrible tragedy to get there. Well, the regional airlines are back. They cannot find pilots anywhere. They're curtailing service. They've got a number of my colleagues in a panic. They're curtailing service to their districts, smaller airports, saying we just can't find pilots. I said, yeah, you can't find pilots at $16,000 a year when it costs them a couple $100,000 to get the training. You know, how about raising wages? Oh, that's not going to solve the problem. That's not the issue. I said, well, maybe it is. And so they're pushing very hard. And there will be attempts during the FAA reauthorization to cut back to 1,000 or 500 or something else. I can guarantee that. Chairman and I have already discussed you know, I'm pretty angry about it, and I said, you know, I'm not going to be very nice to anybody who does offer those kind of amendments during the markup, and I'll bring in the Colgan families and others. So we're going to have to fight to keep that. The issue of foreign repair stations, I started on that probably 12, 14 years ago. We did get some mandates that haven't been followed by Homeland Security. Who is repairing a plane that needs repair, or who is doing, you know, the D checks on these planes overseas? We don't know. They could work for Al-Qaeda. You know, no background checks, no drug or alcohol testing. Sovereignty issue, the State Department says. You know, if they have rules, that's enough. All they have to do is have the rules. That's not enough for me. You know, yeah, I'm not concerned about what goes on in Europe and a lot of other developed countries, but I am concerned about what's going on in a lot of other places that provide the cheapest overhaul or D-check and other services. We need to have minimally drug and alcohol testing, and in my mind, background checks on people who work on critical components. You know, I've worked on, you know, on unapproved parts, again, for more than 20 years. And there's still unbelievable profits to be made in buffing something up that's out of service and getting it back in the stream. And we've been fighting over destruction of those parts when they come off for years. It's a property right. And I said, well, it's a property right, and all it has is scrap value. Why would we allow them to have that part intact and sell it to a salvage yard, who then buffs it up and sells it back into the black market, or tries to sneak it into an airplane somewhere? That's another concern. So the oversight of foreign repair stations, we just had an Inspector General report pointing out at least 10 inadequate areas where we need to improve. I'm working on that in this bill. Lithium batteries. Boeing just sent out an advisory: do not put them on passenger aircraft. A number of airlines have already stopped carrying lithium batteries in bulk, but not all. Congress, in its infinite wisdom, tied us to the lowest standard in the world. They said, unless you can prove a crash happened because of lithium batteries, this is after the passage of the bill, then you can't do anything more than ICAO will do. Well, ICAO, I talked to the FAA representative to ICAO, and he says, well, the only way we get ICAO to act is we say we're going to adopt a higher standard. And he says now they know we can't adopt a higher standard, so they don't care. So they aren't going to meaningfully deal with the issue. At an international conference down in South America last summer, both Boeing and Airbus held a off-the-record briefing and said, by the way, our fire systems cannot suppress lithium battery fires, and you will lose the aircraft. And so that's still very, very much an issue. I want to minimally, get rid of the mandate that says we cannot regulate in the United States lithium battery carriage. And I'd like to go further than that, actually, in dealing with lithium batteries. But at least many of the airlines are acting on their own. Drones, there's, I think, some pretty easy answers to some of the issues with drones, but again, I'm going to have trouble getting people there. Basically, you should say nobody can fly a drone which isn't pre-programmed to avoid restricted airspace built into the software, and which doesn't have an altitude limitation built in. They should be registered so we can track them back to whoever was operating them. And we need to institute, a system of, meaningful fines and penalties or potential prosecution for people who do operate them in restricted airspace. So, that would be, to me, a good start at dealing with the drone issue. There will be a lot of pressure against doing that. But that seems to me to be kind of a no-brainer. The FAA has kind of created some of its own problems because there are areas where they could have, in my mind, been granting use and relieving some of the pressure. We've got a conflict between legitimate users, like I've talked to vintners who say, hey, it's great, I can fly it over the vineyard, I can see where the stressed plants are, I can, another guy was using a little one, he's operating at like 50 feet. In non-restricted private airspace over private property to scare away the birds instead of firing the giant air cannon, which pissed off all his neighbors. Couldn't do that. That was illegal. So, I mean, there are some, if the FAA could get its act together, there are a lot of legitimate uses where there's a lot of pressure. They could relieve a lot of that pressure while, meantime, and then turn more focus toward the safety and security issues that come with these. There is an alternative. I met with a company recently. They're a DoD contractor, but they're now looking at commercial applications of their already proven technology. And they can hack drones. They can pinpoint and tell you exactly where the operator is. They have many options. They can send it back to the operator. They can land it. They can crash it. They can deliver something to the operator, which is what they do in the military version, which I'd be happy to maybe think about doing in the commercial version too. But probably many of my colleagues wouldn't want to go there. So there are technological solutions too. They're actually running tests out in Sterling, Virginia this summer of their technology as a a civilian application. But getting more to the root at the manufacturing level and getting to registration would be good. I mean, the big conflict is people who are real hobbyists, the people who started building model airplanes out of balsa wood with the little the little balky engines on them. They just spin with the kind of things when I was a kid. The legitimate hobbyists who know the rules, very, very, very infrequently do anything inappropriate, feel threatened by any kind of legislation in this area, and I'm trying to figure out a bright line to make them feel secure to support what we want to do here, because I'm saying these people over here are going to ruin everything for you, when one of these things gets sucked into a jet engine. And we actually haven't tested these, and I'm getting, now we're going to get a testing done of what happens when you suck a quadcopter into a jet engine. That testing, I mean, we've done the dead birds frozen, but no one's done the quadcopters and things like that, and we need to conduct those tests, and they're going to simulate those at least up at the research facility. So that's a few things we're working on, and I don't know whether they wanted me to take questions or not. Thank you, Congressman. Great. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Captain Canoll. Thank you, Congressman DeFazio. What a great way to set the stage for discussions for today and tomorrow.